Today we're working on a 2001 Volkswagen Jetta TDI turbo diesel. We're doing a complete timing belt water pump kit on it. I'll show you everything I got for the job. Got the serpentine belt, timing belt itself, a water pump. Make sure you get the one with the metal impeller. A lot of them have a plastic impeller that can self-destruct. Tensioner, the 3 idlers, some bolts, motor mount bolt kit, looks like a few gaskets in there, some more bolts, a little manual. And here's the tools I bought. This is to tighten the tensioner here. This goes in these little divots here. This tool here is the injection pump lock pin that you stick in the injection pump when you pull the belt off and keeps the injection pump in time. And this is a camshaft lock. Really, it's a camshaft alignment plate. It's not really made to lock the cam per se. And there is a few other tools they recommend to use. One of them is a puller for the camshaft gear. And I'll show you guys how you can get all that done without buying that puller. There's a crank lock that I don't think you really need, as long as you keep checking your timing marks on your crank, on your flywheel. You should be good. Just make sure you keep that crank at top dead center. So yeah, let's get pulling parts off. We're gonna pull this intake tube, the intercooler pipe there, this intake pipe, probably the air box just to make more room, and we got to pull the washer fluid reservoir, the fuel, well, maybe not the fuel filter for sure. We got to pull the power steering reservoir and coolant reservoir, and we got to pull the vacuum pump off. And it's kind of a pain on them if you got a manual transmission, because you got these glow plugs here. The coolant glow plugs, the automatics don't have that, so it's a little more work to get down underneath it, but we can definitely make that come off. So I will get back at you when I get these parts pulled off. Alright, I got a lot of the stuff I need out of the way. I'm working on the valve cover right now. Got a tip for you guys. So there's that bolt and that bolt there that are hard to get to. This one in the back, you can come in from back here and get to it just with a regular Allen wrench. This one here, I took a short, they're all 5mm Allens, by the way. I took a short 5mm Allen socket, stick it in there, but as you can see, you can't get a ratchet on it because there's not enough room. So what I did, take a good pair of pliers with some actual teeth on them and work at it like this, and it popped right off, no issues there. So I see a lot of people having problems with these two back bolts. That is what I use to get them off. Okay, a little update for you guys. We got this driver's or passenger side motor mount off. There's still the bracket bolted to the motor there. We got to pull. We got the valve cover off. We got the cam alignment plate in there. So how you go about that, one thing you need to make sure is the number one cylinder lobes need to be facing up. You can easily put think the motor's at top dead center, because in here there's a slot across the camshaft that plate sits in. If you don't have, I mean, you can lock it in 180 degrees out if you're not paying attention to those number one lobes. So make sure they're pointing up. there is a mark on the flywheel. You can see it right there, and there's that little nub pointed down off of the belt housing of the transmission. Those need to line up. Now my cam is locked in place and the crank is out just a touch, so that will all be reset once I put the new belt on. But the car ran perfect, so I don't think it's that big of a deal that it's that far out. So next we are going to pull that bracket off for the motor mount, get the timing covers off, get the belt off, and pull the water pump, put the new water pump on, put the new belt on. This belt really doesn't look that old, but I don't know when it was changed last, so I'm just gonna do the whole kit to not have to worry about it ever. So I will show you guys what it looks like when you get that bracket off. It's kind of a pain. These bolts are in those holes there. Alright, so we got this motor mount bracket pulled. Now you can't take the bracket all the way out of the car unless you pull the motor, because of the way it wraps around the back side of the motor. So we got that off. You want to pull your harmonic balancer off. 4 Allen head bolts. Be really careful on those. They can strip the heads real easy. So now we are going to loosen the tensioner on the belt. So to do that, I already pulled the nut off, 13mm nut. We're going to take our spanner tool here, insert it into, if I can get it in there. Twist it counterclockwise to relieve the tension on the belt. Now the belt is loose, and we can pull the cam gear off. I'll show you guys what to do with that cam gear, how to get that off without a puller. Let me get my tool set up and I'll show you that. So the easiest way to do this: drill a hole in the cover right there. That lines up with the outer edge of the gear. You can see the hole right there. Loosen the bolt up. I already had it loose. Just a little bit so you know when that cam gear pops off. So what we're gonna do is take a punch, stick it through that hole, and tap that cam gear. Now you shouldn't have to tap it too hard, it should pull right off. Let me see if I can set up here somewhere. Just like that. So you don't have to hit it too hard. Now the cam gear's off. So now we can pull the cam gear, pull this belt all the way out, swap all these rollers over, swap the timing or the water pump out, and get the new belt on. I'll show you guys what to do with timing, how to properly tension the belt, and all that good stuff. So we got the belt all the way off. Now what you want to do is you want to pin the injection pump pulley. Do yourself a favor and grab a little mirror. This is the one I have. don't mind breaking it. It still works. And yeah, get a mirror so you can look inside this, inside the where the pin goes. There's, let me see if I can show it. There's a cut away in the pulley, and then there's a little hole that pin sits in the pump. So basically you want that pin to line up with this boss right here in the pump housing. That's when you know it's incorrectly, because you can't actually, there's a window to the right of this that if you go too far you can actually get that pin in the wrong spot. So make sure that it's just a visual. At first, before you put the pin in, rotate the pulley with a mirror holding in front of it to where you can see that actual hole in the pump, and then put the pin in. Once you get the pin in, just look at it and make sure that's lined up straight. So now I'm going to pull my water pump off, which is that guy right there. Get the new pump swapped in, and then swap all these pulleys. I might put new studs on because I have them. Other than that, you want to make sure, if you guys remembered, the crank pulley wasn't 100% lined up, or the crank mark on the flywheel. So before you touch the belt, before you even grab the new belt, make sure you put that crank at top dead center with the marks on the flywheel, and then you can go ahead and route your new belt on. And then I'll show you guys how to tension it with this tensioner, because there's a certain procedure you need to follow to keep the cam gear and the injection pump in time, as well as a crank. So that's the reason we pull this off too. So yeah, I'll show you guys how to tension that belt. Alright, that's where we're at now. We got water pump swapped out, all the rollers swapped out. Actually, I did put a new cam seal in. The old one looked like it was leaking just a little bit, and the kit I bought came with one, so I went ahead and threw that in. We lined the TDC mark back up on the crank. So if you look, it'll focus. Where are we at? Right there. So there's that notch in the bell housing and the line on the crank. Those need to stay exactly lined up just like that. So without the crank lock, you're gonna have to get the new belt on. Let's start at the crank. Start the crank, route up around the pulley, water pump, and when you get to the injection pump, before you put the teeth on it onto the gear, double check, make sure you didn't move that, move the crank at all, and then route that. We'll put the cam gear on, put the tensioner on, and I'll show you how to tension it. Okay, so we got the new belt on. It's routed around the crank. You start at the crank and work your way up the right side. So you'll come up the crank around the big idler, around the water pump, around the injection pump, and then you'll have these off at that point. You want to install the tensioner first, then pull all the slack off of the crank on the left side, and you'll put the cam gear on the belt, slide the cam gear on to the cam, leave this bolt loose. You want the you're going to want that bolt loose so the cam gear and the injection pump can basically stay in time when you tighten the tensioner. So you'll want to put the tensioner nut on, leave that loose as well, leave this loose. You loosen up these 3 bolts on the injection pump sprocket. They're 13mm bolts. Loosen all those up. And one last time before you touch anything over here, come back over here, make sure that mark is on, it's dead on. So then we'll come back over here. There is a mark. I'll get this light here. There's a window on the tensioner right here and a mark on the tensioner here. So when you tighten the tensioner, you need those to line up. That's where you set the tension of the belt. So you'll stick that in there and you'll tighten that. So that those two line up. Sorry, that was the wrong window. The window is, I don't know if you'll be able to see it. So that is tensioned properly right there. There's a get the screwdriver. So right here is a mark, and you can't really see the window. It's basically on this washer right here. There's a window right there. Line those two up, and that is how you properly tension the belt. Now you'll come back, check the crank again, make sure that didn't move. It's right on. So then you'll just snug up the tensioner bolt and the cam pulley bolt, and you have a belt that is tensioned properly. And after you're done with that, after you get these two tightened, you're going to want to spin the motor over 2 revolutions, and that is to just make 100% sure that you don't have anything out of time. You're not going to have any piston to valve problems, I guess you could say, when you go to start the motor, because if you even try to start it with, if you got a valve hitting a piston, it will damage and bend a valve. So this just ensures that you don't have any problems there. So go ahead, tighten those two up, spin the motor over 2 revolutions, put it back on top dead center, make sure the cam and the crank are in time, make sure the injection pump is in time. You'll obviously pull the pin out, pull the cam lock out, and then you can get to finishing up, tightening up, put all this stuff back on, and then you'll have to set the injection pump timing with software called VADCOM or VCDS. So yeah, if you don't have access to that, I guess you can kind of guesstimate, but it's never very accurate. That's the best way to do it with VADCOM. So other than that, that's pretty much, that's how you properly tension that belt. So you definitely want the cam gear loose. If you don't have the cam gear loose, it'll try turning the cam itself, and that will throw the crank and the cam out of time. So that's the reason that we pop the cam gear off and leave it loose when we tension the belt. Alright guys, we got the belt on, got the belt tensioned like I just showed you. I went and pulled all of the rags out of the intake just to make sure they don't get sucked in. and I spun the motor over, and now we are back at top dead center. The camshaft plate slides right in, and the marks on the crank or on the flywheel is right on. So that is in time. Another thing you want to look at is these slots in the injection pump. So this is for adjustment. So to get the injection pump in adjustment, you need to have basically the bolt in the center of these slots. So if it's when you get it all timed and the bolts are way to one side, then you're not going to have that adjustment after the fact when you go into VCDS and to adjust that. So that if your bolts are way off, then you're probably a tooth off on the injection pump. But as you can see, they're pretty centered in there. So that should give me enough adjustment to get that in spec. So now it's a matter of bolting everything back on that we took off. We'll start with the harmonic balancer, and well, actually the timing cover, the motor mount bracket here to the block, and then harmonic balancer. Then come up, get the top motor mount on, get the power steering, coolant, all that button back up, get the valve cover back on. You should probably put that on first, actually, just to keep the dirt and grime out of here. You don't want anything falling in there. Get the vacuum pump back on, and yeah, that's about it. Just assembly is basically the reverse of taking it apart. And then another thing you want to look at is once you get it running, you want these belts, or the belt, to be pretty centered on these pulleys. Right now it's not going to be centered because it's only, I might turn it over one more time and just to make sure it's going to be centered. But you don't want the pulley or the belt running off the pulley. Now it's not going to be centered on this from what I hear, but it should be centered on the camshaft. So another thing to look out for. And then just make sure all your teeth are in the sprocket. You don't want to have anything jump off on you. But I suppose if you were off on if your teeth weren't on all the way, you wouldn't be able to get the tensioner on, or the tensioner set correctly. So, and then one more thing, before you button it all back up, take a mirror and check that tensioner one more time, just to make sure that it didn't move at all. Make sure it's torqued to spec, and use your holding tool on the tensioner to hold it in place when you tighten that nut. That'll keep it from moving. Alright guys, we got it all buttoned up except for that timing cover, just to see everything working when it starts up. So let's see if she fires up. Alright, now I'm going to show you guys how to set the pump timing with VCDS. So, got the cable in to the computer. We're going to open VCDS. Go to engine. Wait for that to load. Then go to measuring blocks, 000, click go. Come down to switch to basic settings. Over on the right, you'll see TDI timing. And you'll, from that drop down menu, pick your car. So we are pretty close. We're at 70. And I'm supposed to, my tuner says to time it at 64, so we got just a smidge to go. So we're gonna exit out of all this. Turn the car off. Grab a 22 mil wrench and a 13 millimeter socket. We're going to loosen the three 13 millimeter bolts on the injection pump. I got my light. So those 3 bolts right there, we're going to loosen those. Then we're going to take our 22 millimeter wrench on that big center nut, and so I'm too far advanced, so I need to retard the timing. So to retard the timing, you would push the wrench towards the windshield. To advance it, you would pull the wrench back, and you really do not have to move it very much. You'll get the feel of it after a time or two, but you really don't move it very much at all. So I'm gonna do that. It's gonna be hard to do that while holding the camera, so I'm gonna set this down, then we'll go check it again and see where it's at. So we're a little retarded now. We're about 55. So that thing is very, very touchy. I moved it as small of an increment as I could. So we're gonna have to bump that back up just a little bit. So yeah, you don't move that pump very far at all, and it moves quite a bit. So we'll have to go try that again. Alright, we're right there. That was my last adjustment. So it's jumping around from 63 to 65, so we're right in the ballpark. So we're gonna exit out of that. So that's it. I hope that helped you guys out. It's really not that hard if you pay attention to what you're doing. And then there's also, if you search on the TDIclub.com, there's a few pretty good write-ups on it. So just have that handy, print it out, have it on your phone, and just follow it step by step. And make sure you buy the tools. The 3 tools that I bought, I would say you need. The other ones, I obviously didn't use them, so I wouldn't say they're 100% necessary. But yeah, hope that helped you guys out.